Listen, Shredder, hand over April, or else you're gonna be deader. Oh, you won't hand over the babe? Well, this one's for you. Cowabunga! Damn it.
I practiced so much I thought I'd be able to catch it out of it. Oh, you're filming! Great. That's exactly what I was hoping, because I wanted this to be on the video, and it's out of focus. Oh, it's out of focus. I think we can't use it, or we'll delete this, and we won't talk to anyone about this ever.
Police are baffled by the recent crime wave led by a superfly.
Nobody's ever seen his face.
Why?
Because he kills everyone who does.
Whoa.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Mutant Mayhem is they're turtles, they're ninjas, they're mutants, and they're teenagers. Look, that's about as much sense as this is going to make, but I'm assuming you know what they are by now. It's another one. It's Turtle time, baby. The Ninja Turtles have a new film, and it's animated, because apparently these films just bounce back and forth in a purgatory between live action and animation. And I also should say they kind of generally bounce back and forth in terms of quality. So going into this movie, I was hoping for something that felt distinct and decent. And I'm happy to say Mutant Mayhem delivered in spades. As mentioned, this is an animated adaptation of the Turtles, and it's undoubtedly the most stylish and visually interesting version we've ever gotten on the big screen. It owes a lot to the Spider-Verse movies and the Mitchells vs. the Machines, whose co-director Jeff Rowe directed this film. And they've gone for a really interesting, cool, scratchy design for the film, and it absolutely suits it down to the ground, and it surprisingly has a lot of variation in it. There's moments where it just looks really ugly and distorted in an intentional way that totally suits the film, and there's other times where it's just really colourful and kinetic. They went for a sort of teenagery sketchbook look, or so they say, for this film, and it totally suits it down to the ground. And honestly, I'm just so glad we're in an era of animated films where they can be a bit more interesting and experimental, and for me personally, this might be my favourite of those yet. The character designs are also awesome. I feel like every turtle actually feels distinct and different outside of just the colour of bandana they're wearing, and they're not overburdened by gadgets like they were in the Michael Bay films. I also have to say the scavenger Splinter look they're going for actually surprisingly works, especially with this version of the character and the story they're telling. The mutants in general all look awesome. I mean, they tip their hats to the classic design, but also giving them enough to feel a little bit different and new. The only character I didn't really feel landed in the design stage was April O'Neil. She just wasn't very memorable for me. Then again, it's kind of hard to stand out in a sea of mutants and monsters, and it's not like the original April O'Neil was that memorable or stood out. See, it's just I don't remember how she looked at all. Of course, it's not just the look of an animated film that needs to be nailed, but also the voice work, and thankfully, the voice work in the Ninja Turtles movie is outstanding and inspired. The talk going into this was that the Teenage Mutant Turtles were going to be voiced by teenagers. Imagine. That was a masterstroke. They absolutely nailed it. You can tell they record their lines together because the way they play off each other is so believable and realistic. They mock each other, they play with each other, but there's affection there. You can tell. They just come off as very affable and very likeable. And honestly, the result of that was that for the first time ever in TMNT, it actually felt like to me that they were really teenagers. And I never have really had that feeling before. But they just come off as very likeable, and you root for them. And as a result, you really buy the connection between the brothers. The mutant cast is fantastic as well. I loved Ice Cube playing Superfly. What a cool character. Get it? Because Ice Cube. In general, though, it's like they obviously had him in mind from the get-go, because it feels like the design and the dialogue is totally geared towards him. I feel like they basically said, hey, Ice Cube, you just go out there and be Ice Cube, and it absolutely worked.
6 in the morning, police at my door.
Ice Cube is Superfly.
Y'all some little tortoises.
Then we have Seth Rogen and John Cena playing Bebop and Rocksteady. Seth Rogen playing a warthog for the second time in his career. And yeah, they're not in as much as you might hope. Some fans might be disappointed by that, but I liked what we got of them, and hopefully if we see more of them down the line, we'll get more of them, and it'll kind of confirm how great they are in those roles, but I would have liked a little bit more of them. But in general, the mutant cast is just fantastic. It feels like they managed to either get voice actors who suited the characters they had in mind, or lent the design and characterization of those characters into the voice actors so that they were a perfect match. And yeah, they all are fantastic. There's lots of them, and it feels like each of them has enough moments and was captivating enough that they're all memorable, which is a real pat on the back for the movie. Then we have Jackie Chan as Splinter, who just seemed perfect on paper, and in execution is fantastic as well. He just has great delivery. He has a real tenderness and funny side to him as well when the scene calls for it.
When some of the guys wanted to get pizza and I tried to talk them out of it.
You ratted us out.
Hey, don't use that word that way.
And then we have Ayo Edebiri as April O'Neil, who is fantastic. She has such great timing and has a real kind of emotional side for the Turtles at times and kind of nobility. Yeah, she was perfect as April. Again, the only thing I had issue with April was the character design. I don't know how much you can do with April O'Neil as a character design. It's like, hey, baggy hat, fine. Is she wearing yellow? Yeah, there, go, we got it. I also thought the characterization for this was on point. The Turtles feel like perfect embodiments of their usual personas, while also having the shield of them being young and still growing into those, so we get to see the kind of characters we know and recognise emerge from that. And we get some great moments as they kind of learn who they are themselves throughout. And I think as the series goes on, hopefully, we'll get even more of that again. The characters that are probably going to be the most divisive for some fans are Splinter and April. Their personas and their characterization is maybe a little bit different. It didn't bother me to a massive degree because I still feel fairly familiar. Splinter treats the Turtles like his sons. He does have some motivations that some people might take issue with, but I feel like it's kind of justified and suited the story they were telling. And in general, he also learns from the Turtles, which I thought was a really nice touch as well. It should be kind of back and forth. He's teaching and caring for them, and they teach and care for him in return. Then we have April O'Neil, who kind of has the brain power the Turtles don't always have, and I thought she was excellent here. And unlike a lot of other versions, she doesn't feel like a damsel in distress or kind of thrown to the side. She actually feels like she has purpose and place in the plot. So absolutely, I really like this version of April. So they nailed the mutant, they nailed the teenage. What about the ninja aspect of it all? I really liked the action and fight scenes in this movie. They really managed to make something creative and cool and fast without feeling incoherent, and I feel like that's a real testament to the animation team here. They did an excellent job. They also made good use of their weaponry, finding some creative uses for each of them. And, you know, I would say that is more violent than I expected at times. Not because it doesn't suit the Turtles, but because I thought they might try to sand some of those edges off. Not really. I mean, there's a moment where one of them just knocks a guy out cold for no real reason. So, you know, that's fun, is it? If I had one complaint, I would say it's that the best action comes early in the movie, meaning the second half or the last act especially, is a bit more lacking. We get a great fight scene where they meet April O'Neil, where they're kind of, you know, learning their way and how to work as a team, where them being over their head is just a really fun dynamic. And we get an awesome montage that is really cool when they're cracking down on crime. And, you know, even though the last act feels like it's a bit action light, we do get an ending that's a bit more focused on teamwork and brain power to beat the enemy, which, you know, should be lauded. It doesn't always have to be a big fight in a city. We also get to see Splinter kick some ass. It's kind of cool to see the old rat kick some ass, isn't it? It's just cool. It's really good, especially kind of makes up for the fact that in the first Ninja Turtle movie, he basically just stood there to fight Shredder.
What I began with your ear.
One thing that slaps harder than any fight scene is the soundtrack. Remember a couple of years ago where there was that Tom and Jerry movie we've all forgotten about that had a surprisingly sick soundtrack full of hip-hop and R&B that didn't suit the movie? Well, this is better than that and actually suits the movie. I mean, DMX, A Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, I think there's 2 ODB songs on the soundtrack.
Mommy, what does ODB stand for? When I grow up, I want to be an old dirty bastard.
I'm just glad that ODB's prophetic words are finally true.
But when it comes to the children, Wu-Tang is for the children. We teach the children.
Now you might say, how does that work in the movie? Well, like how any soundtrack works, they found songs that fit the tone of each scene. But it goes deeper than that. They also got songs that are predominantly 80s and 90s, the Turtles' heyday, so it suits them in that regard. And also it's mostly East Coast hip-hop. New York City, baby, home of the Turtles. And even if you weren't a fan of like hip-hop or jukebox soundtracks, the score is made by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, the 9 Inch Nails Oscar winners for their scores, who usually work with Fincher and other auteur directors. Somehow they're doing this movie as well. I'm so glad they did, because it's full of like heart-racing, pulsing electronic music and then some slower, softer movements that are just amazing. I've been listening to it since the movie came out. It's radical, dude. The story of the movie, on the other hand, is pretty basic. The characters and the comedy, it's a very funny movie, by the way, were enough where it didn't bother me that much, but really the story is just Turtles need to stop Superfly from making a super weapon, because if they're heroes, then they might be accepted in the real world outside of the sewers. And that's something we've seen like a million times before. It's totally serviceable. It just doesn't really reinvent the wheel and kind of betrays some of the creativity in other areas of the film. But in general, the creativity was enough in other areas that I could look past it. I also am quite grateful they kind of brushed over the origin story. We've seen it enough by now. I will say I think the film does have some pacing issues. It is a little bit start-stop at times. And I do think the second act is a little bit more hollow than the first and the third act. And as mentioned, the third act is a little less action heavy, which could throw some people off. I wonder if some people are going to have problems though. I'll say this, I didn't expect it to end the way it ended. I'm not against it, I just was surprised, and I'm interested to see where it goes. I'm also not sure about some of the mutants towards the end of the film and what their role could be in the future. And I don't know about Splinter's origin, but I also will say I'm not really dogmatic to canon, and in general, I feel like the creative team who made this movie have earned enough faith and goodwill after making this movie that I'll trust them whatever direction they take it, even if it's one on the surface I don't necessarily agree with or see the justification for. But in general, I'm just excited to see where the next entry of this will go. For those fans though, there's a lot of Easter eggs and some subtle seeds sown for a sequel that you mightn't even pick up on the first viewing. And again, maybe they won't go in that direction. There is a very clear indication of where they want to go in the mid-credit scene for this movie. But I will say this, I'd love to see more of these movies and more of this universe that they've created and this version of the Turtles. So as weird as I feel saying it, to go out and support and see the millionth adaptation of the Ninja Turtles, it's an excellent film and you really should go see it. Mutant Mayhem is as fun as it sounds, with some stunning animation, inspired voice casting, and some creative choices that really put the teenage back in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And with some killer action and a kick-ass soundtrack, it is absolutely a joy to the eyes and ears. Like a New York City subway though, it does have some stop-start problems in the pacing department, and while the story isn't quite as innovative as the rest of the film, if you're not dogmatic to canon, you'll find an exciting and innovative take on the Turtles that will make you fall in love with them, or remind you why you always believed in turtle power. Cowabunga dudes.